The void of space shimmered briefly, a faint ripple against the backdrop of endless stars. Then, like ghosts breaking through a veil, humanity's fleet emerged. Cloaked ships glided silently toward the Galactic Empire's forward fleet, their matte black hulls absorbing starlight, rendering them nearly invisible. The Erebus, humanity's flagship, led the charge, its silhouette a blade forged in secrecy. On the bridge of the Erebus, Commander Nathan Voss stood motionless, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. The dim red lights of the command deck illuminated his sharp features, casting long shadows that mirrored the fleet's predatory advance. His eyes, as cold as the void outside, locked on the holographic display in front of him. "Targets confirmed." Lieutenant Karen's voice broke the tense silence, her tone low but steady. 3 Imperial cruisers, 1 logistics vessel, and their command ship, designated Sovereign's Blade, all within strike range. Voss nodded slowly, his voice measured. "Time to impact?" 17 minutes, Karen replied, her fingers dancing over the console. "Cloaking integrity is stable. They don't know we're here." "Good," Voss said, his voice carrying the weight of years lost to exile and vengeance. "Maintain formation. Let's remind them what it feels like to be hunted." The crew moved with quiet precision, their faces a mix of focus and anticipation. They had waited for this moment, some for decades. Voss could feel the tension in the air, a palpable undercurrent of anger and grief transformed into purpose. Through the viewport, the Empire's fleet hung like arrogant sentinels, their ships bristling with weaponry and glowing faintly with shields. The Sovereign's Blade loomed at the center, its sleek design a testament to the Empire's technological arrogance. "They think they're invincible," Voss muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Sir?" Karen asked, glancing up. Voss turned to her, a flicker of something, maybe humor, maybe scorn, in his otherwise stoic expression. "They always do." The room fell silent again, save for the soft hum of the ship's engines and the rhythmic beeping of consoles. The Erebus and its fleet glided closer, their movements calculated and deliberate. The holographic display flickered, and an ominous glow spread across its surface. The artifact. Suspended in its containment chamber deep within the Erebus, the precursor relic pulsed faintly, as if alive. Its glyphs shimmered and shifted, forming patterns that no human mind could fully comprehend. "Commander," Karen said hesitantly, "the artifact, it's reacting." Voss turned toward the glowing map, his gaze narrowing. The glyphs spiraled and converged on a single point, the Sovereign's Blade. The artifact had spoken. "Mark that point," Voss ordered. "Relay it to the fleet. That's where we strike." Karen hesitated. "Sir, we still don't fully understand." "Do it," Voss interrupted, his tone leaving no room for debate. "If the artifact says it's important, we don't question it. We act." The tension on the bridge grew thicker, but the crew complied without further hesitation. They trusted Voss, and they trusted the artifact, even if it terrified them. "ETA to firing range?" Voss asked. 3 minutes, Karen said, her voice now steady again. Voss turned back to the viewport, his gaze fixed on the Sovereign's Blade. "Prepare all weapons. Target the coordinates provided by the artifact. No margin for error." Outside, the void began to shift. The Empire's fleet, oblivious to the approaching storm, held its rigid formation, confident in their superiority. Then, without warning, humanity's fleet unleashed its fury. Silent missiles streaked through the darkness, their engines activating only at the last moment. Energy beams lanced forward, their precision tearing through the Empire's shields like paper. The first Imperial cruiser erupted in a fireball, its hull splitting apart in a cascade of debris. Alarms blared on the Sovereign's Blade as the Empire's fleet scrambled to react. Their communications, jammed by humanity's advanced systems, filled the void with fractured, panicked transmissions. "Impact on target!" Karen's voice rang out, her tone now sharp with adrenaline. "Their shields are down." "Maintain fire," Voss commanded. "Target their engines. Don't let them recover." The bridge erupted in controlled chaos as humanity's fleet pressed the attack. Voss watched the holographic display with the focus of a predator, adjusting the fleet's movements with swift, precise orders. On board the Sovereign's Blade, The Empire's Admiral Creeth staggered as the ship shuddered violently. "What is happening?" he roared, his voice echoing through the command deck. "Unidentified vessels, sir," a panicked officer replied. "Their technology, it's unlike anything we've seen." Creeth's eyes widened as another explosion rocked the ship. The view outside was chaos, Imperial ships collapsing under the relentless assault, their once imposing fleet reduced to scattered wreckage. "This can't be," Creeth muttered, his voice trembling. Humanity was destroyed. A transmission cut through the chaos, its signal slicing through Imperial systems like a blade. Voss's face appeared on their screens, his expression calm but cold. "This is Commander Nathan Voss of the United Earth Fleet," he said, his voice steady and unforgiving. "You thought you erased us. You thought we were gone. But humanity does not forget, and we do not forgive. Your reign ends here." The transmission ended as abruptly as it began, leaving only silence and the relentless destruction outside. Back on the Erebus, Voss allowed himself a small, grim smile as the Sovereign's blade finally succumbed, its core detonating in a brilliant flash. The Empire's forward fleet was no more. "Mission complete," Karen said, her voice laced with awe. "Not yet," Voss replied, his tone resolute. "This was just the beginning. Send word to the fleet. We move for the next target." As the Erebus turned away from the burning wreckage, the artifact pulsed once more, its glyphs shifting to form a new pattern. Voss watched it closely, his mind already calculating the next move. Humanity had returned, and the galaxy would soon learn what that meant. The cold expanse of space stretched endlessly before the Erebus, its hull faintly illuminated by the glowing remnants of the destroyed Sovereign's blade. Silence filled the bridge, punctuated only by the soft hum of the ship's engines and the rhythmic beeping of distant consoles. Commander Nathan Voss stood unmoving, staring at the holographic display that now centered on their next target. The artifact's glyphs pulsed faintly in synchrony with his heartbeat, its silent language urging him forward. "Admiral Creeth's fleet is gone," Lieutenant Karen reported, her voice steady but edged with a hint of disbelief. "We've eliminated their command structure in this sector. Preliminary scans suggest their remaining ships have scattered." Voss's gaze remained locked on the display. "Scattered fleets can regroup. Scatter them further. I want no trace of cohesion, no chance of recovery." "Yes, sir," Karen replied, her fingers darting across the console to relay the orders. "Any word from the enemy comms?" Voss asked, turning toward the communications officer, Ensign Dralek, a wiry man whose sharp eyes rarely left his monitor. Dralek adjusted his headset. "Intercepts are fragmented, sir. Their central communication arrays are down, but we're picking up scattered chatter. Fear, mostly. They don't know who we are, or what hit them." A shadow of satisfaction crossed Voss's face. "Let them speculate. Fear is a weapon. Use it wisely, and it does half the work for you." He turned back to the display, the artifact's pulsing light casting ghostly shadows on his face. The next target was clear, a heavily fortified Imperial supply depot at the edge of the Andarian Nebula. The depot served as a critical node for the Empire, fueling their fleets and sustaining their vast networks of control. "Lieutenant," Voss said, his voice slicing through the ambient noise, "begin preparations for the next strike. Full cloaking protocols, staggered approach vectors. I want precision." "Yes, Commander." Karen straightened, her movements brisk and efficient. A quiet murmur spread among the crew as they absorbed the scale of what lay ahead. The Andarian depot was no ordinary target. It was the Empire's lifeblood in this sector, guarded by automated defense grids and reinforced garrisons. For most, it would seem an impossible task. For Voss, it was necessary. The Erebus drifted silently through the void, its cloaking technology rendering it invisible to the galaxy. In the war room, Voss stood surrounded by a select group of officers, each a vital thread in the tapestry of Earth's resurgence. Lieutenant Kalor, a grizzled tactician with eyes that seemed to see through walls, leaned over the central display. "The Andarian depot isn't just a fuel hub," he said, tracing a finger along its holographic outline. "It's their primary staging ground for logistics. Taking it out would cripple them in more ways than one." "And it's a fortress," added Commander Elric, his tone laced with skepticism. The man was younger, but no less hardened, his voice carrying the weight of countless battles. Even with our fleet's capabilities, the depot's defenses will make Sovereign's blade look like a training exercise. Which is exactly why it must fall, Voss interjected, his voice calm but firm. He gestured toward the artifact, which pulsed faintly in its containment field beside the display. The artifact has identified Andarian as critical. That alone tells me the risk is worth it. Kaller arched a skeptical brow. And you trust this thing? We don't know what it is, where it came from, or— Enough, Voss said sharply, silencing the murmurs. He met Kaller's gaze, his own unwavering. The artifact has led us here. Without it, we wouldn't have dismantled Kreeth's fleet. Question its purpose if you must, but not its results. A heavy silence followed. Voss let it linger, the tension coiling like a spring, before releasing it with a measured breath. Elric, assemble infiltration teams, Voss continued. We'll strike the depot in 2 phases. Phase 1, destabilize their automated defenses and blind their long-range scanners. Phase 2, full-scale assault. Precision strikes only. We can't afford collateral damage. It will weaken our position among potential allies. And if we fail? Kaller asked, his voice low but steady. We won't, Voss replied, his tone resolute. Humanity has no margin for failure. Not anymore. The Andarian nebula loomed ahead, its swirling gases a kaleidoscope of colors that belied the dangers hidden within. Ionic storms crackled across the expanse, their energy enough to fry unshielded ships in moments. Beyond the nebula, the depot's formidable structure rose like a dark monolith, its spires bristling with weaponry. On board the Erebus, the tension was palpable. The crew moved with purpose, their focus sharpened by the weight of their mission. Infiltration teams assembled in the hangar bay, their armor reflecting the dim emergency lights. Voss descended to the bay, his presence commanding silence. He approached one of the teams, led by Sergeant Thalic, a gruff veteran whose scars told stories of battles won and lost. Sergeant, Voss said, his tone measured, you know what's at stake. Thalic nodded. We'll get it done, sir, no matter what. Good. Voss placed a hand on the sergeant's shoulder, a rare gesture of camaraderie. The depot's defense grid will fight like a cornered animal. Remember, precision and speed. We're not here to prove a point. We're here to win. Thalic's eyes hardened with resolve. Understood, sir. The infiltration teams launched first, their small, cloaked shuttles slipping through the nebula's turbulence with practiced ease. As they approached the depot, the artifact aboard the Erebus began to pulse faster, its glyphs shifting into new, more complex patterns. On the bridge, Voss monitored their progress, his fingers gripping the edge of the console. The artifact's behavior was both a guide and an enigma, its shifting light casting eerie shadows on the faces of the crew. Commander, Karen said quietly, do you think the artifact is leading us or using us? Voss didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the display, where the first team breached the depot's outer perimeter. Explosions flared briefly before vanishing into the void. I think, he said finally, it doesn't matter, as long as it leads us to victory. The first phase of the operation began in earnest. Automated turrets sputtered and died, their control systems overridden by the infiltration teams. Alarms blared within the depot, but the chaos spread too quickly for a coordinated response. In the shadows of the nebula, the Erebus and its fleet waited, engines primed for the second phase. Voss's voice cut through the silence. All units, he commanded, his tone ablade in the darkness. Engage. The fleet surged forward, cloaked ships emerging like specters from the nebula's embrace. The depot's defenses scrambled to respond, but humanity's precision strikes dismantled them with brutal efficiency. Explosions lit the void, casting fiery reflections across the swirling gases of the nebula. On the bridge, Voss watched as the depot began to crumble. His jaw tightened, his gaze unwavering. The galaxy was beginning to remember what humanity was capable of, and they had only just begun. The Andarian depot burned, its skeletal remains illuminated by the dying light of distant stars. Twisted metal drifted through the void, sparking as it collided with debris from the shattered Empire fleet. From the viewport of the Erebus, Commander Nathan Voss stared silently at the destruction, his jaw clenched. The depot's fall was a significant victory, yet Voss's unease lingered like a shadow behind his sharp gray eyes. "Reports from the infiltration team?" he asked, his voice breaking the tense silence on the bridge. "Team Delta is returning to base," Lieutenant Karen said. "Minimal casualties, sir." "However—" She hesitated, her gaze flicking toward the holographic display that pulsed faintly with the artifact's glyphs. "Speak freely, Lieutenant," Voss said, though his tone carried the weight of someone who already knew what she was about to say. "There were anomalies," Karen admitted, her fingers tightening around the edges of her console. "The artifact's guidance was precise, but several glyphs shifted mid-mission, almost as if it was recalibrating to a threat we couldn't see. Team Delta reported strange energy fluctuations near the depot's core. An Imperial prototype, perhaps, or something older." Voss's brows furrowed. "Older," he repeated, the word curling in his mind like smoke. The artifact's cryptic patterns had often provided them with an edge, but its nature remained a riddle they were no closer to solving. "Send the scans to intelligence. I want every detail analyzed." "Yes, sir," Karen replied, her voice steady but her unease palpable. The Erebus lurched slightly as the fleet adjusted its position. The transition was smooth, but the faint vibration rattling through the hull seemed almost deliberate, a subtle reminder of the precarious balance they walked. "Commander?" Ensign Dralick called from the communication station, his voice taut with urgency. "Incoming transmission on a secured channel. It's not Imperial." Voss turned sharply, his interest piqued. "Source?" "Unclear, sir," Dralick said. "Signal is bouncing across multiple relays. Whoever it is, they don't want to be tracked." Voss exchanged a glance with Karen, who gave a cautious nod. "Put it through," he ordered. The holographic display shifted, static flickering across its surface before resolving into the image of an alien figure. Tall and angular, with eyes like burning embers, the alien wore battle-scarred armor etched with faded glyphs. "This is Commander Voss of the United Earth Fleet," Voss said, his tone firm but diplomatic. "Identify yourself." The alien inclined his head slightly, his voice a low, resonant growl. "I am Zarlik of the Vranthi Resistance. My people have suffered under the Empire's heel for generations. We've watched your resurgence with great interest, Commander." Voss didn't blink. "Interest alone doesn't explain this transmission." Zarlik's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile or a warning. "No, it doesn't. The destruction of the Andarian depot has sent shockwaves through the Empire's network. Their fleets are scrambling, their command fracturing. You've done what no one else has dared, let alone accomplished. The galaxy is beginning to believe." "And you?" Voss asked, his gaze unwavering. "Do you believe?" Zarlik's ember-like eyes narrowed. "Belief is irrelevant. What matters is action. My people are prepared to join your fight, but we require proof of your commitment. There's a prison colony on Veklar 9, a desolate wasteland where the Empire holds our leaders. Free them, and the Vranthi Resistance will fight alongside you." The bridge fell silent, the weight of Zarlik's proposition settling like a heavy stone. "And if we refuse?" Voss asked, his tone neutral but probing. "Then you fight alone," Zarlik said simply, his expression unflinching. Voss stared at the hologram for a long moment, weighing the risks. The Vranthi were formidable warriors, their guerrilla tactics legendary among those who dared resist the Empire. Gaining their alliance could tip the scales further in humanity's favor, but a prison colony was no small task. "Commander?" Karen prompted quietly, her voice breaking the silence. Voss exhaled slowly, his decision made. "We'll consider your request," he said to Zarlik. "But know this, if this is a trap, I'll burn your world before the Empire ever gets the chance." Zarlik's smile returned, sharper this time. "Spoken like a true predator. I'll await your answer, Commander. The transmission cut, leaving the bridge in silence. In the war room, Voss stood surrounded by his senior officers, the holographic display projecting the barren wasteland of Veklar 9. Dust storms raged across its surface, obscuring the Empire's prison complex, a fortress bristling with turrets and shield generators. Recon reports suggest heavy fortifications, Lieutenant Kaller said, his gravelly voice laced with skepticism. Automated defenses, thermal drones, and reinforced garrisons. It's a death trap. Every Imperial installation is a death trap, Commander Elric countered, his tone sharper than usual. And yet here we are, alive and winning. It's a calculated risk, Voss interjected, his voice cutting through their bickering. The Vranthi's support is worth it. Their knowledge of the Empire's supply routes alone could cripple their logistics. Kaller folded his arms. And the artifact? Does it factor into this mission? Voss's gaze shifted to the glowing relic, its glyphs once again shifting in patterns only it understood. The artifact hasn't spoken on this yet, he admitted. But we can't wait for its guidance. This is a decision we make ourselves. Elric leaned forward, his expression serious. Then we strike fast. Cloaked insertion teams disable the outer defenses while the fleet distracts their orbital patrols. Precision and speed, just like Andarian. And if something goes wrong? Kaller pressed. Voss's lips thinned. It won't. The fleet approached Veklar 9 under the cover of its storms, the swirling dust providing natural camouflage for their cloaked ships. The Erebus hung in low orbit, its dark hull blending seamlessly with the chaotic skies below. On board the lead insertion shuttle, Sergeant Thalek reviewed his team's mission parameters. Each soldier wore streamlined armor, their visors glowing faintly as they synced with the shuttle's systems. "Stick to your sectors," Thalek ordered, his voice calm but firm. "No heroics. The commander wants this clean and quiet." As the shuttle pierced the atmosphere, the storm's turbulence rattled its hull. Lightning arced outside, illuminating the prison complex in fleeting bursts. From above, it looked like a steel beast crouched on the desert floor, its defenses bristling like spines. Thalek's team landed silently, their cloaking fields activating as they slipped into the shadows. The air was thick with dust and the acrid tang of industrial waste, the storm's howling winds masking their movements. Through his visor, Thalek spotted the first turret, its automated sensors scanning the wasteland. With a swift hand signal, he directed his team to disable it. A muffled explosion followed, the turret collapsing in a plume of sparks. "Outer defenses neutralized," Thalek reported, his voice low and steady. On the Erebus, Voss watched their progress through the holographic display, his hands clasped behind his back. Every move was calculated, every risk balanced against the mission's importance. "Sergeant," Voss said into the comms, his tone even, "you're clear to proceed. No mistakes." Thalek's reply crackled through the static. "Understood, Commander." As the team advanced deeper into the complex, the artifact aboard the Erebus began to pulse faster, its glyphs shifting erratically. Voss's gaze hardened. Whatever lay ahead, it was far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. The winds of Veklar 9 screamed like a wounded beast, carrying razor-sharp sand that scratched at the armor of Sergeant Thalek's team as they moved through the labyrinthine prison complex. Their cloaking fields shimmered faintly, distorted by the storm's chaotic energy. The air was dense and suffocating, laced with the acrid tang of ionized metal and scorched earth. Thalek crouched behind a jagged outcropping of steel debris, his visor scanning the turret-lined courtyard ahead. The storm offered cover, but the swirling dust also reduced visibility to a treacherous haze. He toggled his comms, his voice low but resolute. "Team Alpha, clear the East Quadrant. Beta, you're with me. We breach in 60 seconds. No noise, no mistakes." Behind him, Corporal Aaron gave a curt nod, his breathing steady despite the weight of the mission. "Turret grid still active, Sarge. That means drones, too. They'll smell us the moment we step out of this cover." Thalek's lips thinned into a grim line. "They can smell all they want. They won't have time to bark." Above them, a flicker of light cut through the storm, an Imperial drone. its spherical form glowing faintly as it scanned the area. Thalek's hand shot up, signaling a halt. The team froze, their armor blending seamlessly with the jagged terrain. The drone hovered closer, its mechanical hum slicing through the howling wind. Thalek's gloved hand slid to his rifle, his finger hovering just above the trigger. The seconds stretched, each breath a gamble. Then, with a sudden shift, the drone turned away, disappearing into the storm. Thalek exhaled slowly. "Move! Now!" The team surged forward, their footsteps muffled by the storm. The prison loomed ahead, a hulking fortress of reinforced steel and glowing energy barriers. Lightning arced above, illuminating the spires of automated turrets that swiveled in relentless patrol. On the Erebus, Commander Nathan Voss watched the infiltration unfold through the holographic display. The artifact pulsed rhythmically in its containment field, its glyphs shifting in maddening patterns. Voss's gaze flicked between the display and the artifact, his mind a storm of calculations. "What's the artifact saying now?" Lieutenant Karen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It isn't saying anything," Voss replied, his tone clipped. "It's screaming." Karen's eyes darted to the glowing glyphs. "Should we abort the mission?" Voss shook his head, his expression unyielding. "Number, whatever's in that prison, the artifact wants it. That's reason enough to press forward." Inside the prison's perimeter, Thalek's team breached the outer barrier with synchronized precision. The energy field shimmered and collapsed as Corporal Aaron's hacking device overloaded its circuits. The team slipped through the gap, their movements ghost-like. The inner compound was eerily silent, the storm's roar muted by the thick walls. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sharp shadows across the cold, metallic floors. The air was thick with the scent of oil and ozone, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Thalek gestured for silence, his hand signaling a split. "Aaron, Varys, take the upper level. Disable their comms. The rest of you, with me. We find the prisoners." The group dispersed, their footsteps soundless against the steel. The tension was suffocating, each corner a potential ambush. As they advanced, faint echoes of distant machinery reverberated through the corridors, a mechanical heartbeat that seemed to pulse in time with the artifact's glow. "Commander, we've got movement," Karen reported from the Erebus, her fingers dancing across the console. "Imperial patrols converging on the complex. They're bringing reinforcements." "Deploy a distraction," Voss ordered, his tone ice-cold. "Keep their eyes off the infiltration team." "Yes, sir." Thalek's team reached the main detention block, its heavy doors sealed by a reinforced locking mechanism. Aaron worked swiftly, his hacking device emitting faint clicks and whirs as it bypassed the security protocols. "Hurry up, Corporal," Thalek said, his voice tight. "Almost there," Aaron muttered, sweat beading beneath his helmet. The lock released with a hiss, and the doors slid open to reveal a cavernous chamber lined with containment cells. Each cell pulsed with an eerie blue light, the energy field shimmering faintly as they held their occupants. Thalek scanned the room, his visor highlighting the figures within. Most were humanoid, their forms battered and emaciated, but their eyes burned with defiance. At the far end of the chamber, a larger cell stood apart, its occupant obscured by shadows. "Sergeant," Varys called over the comms, his voice urgent, "you might want to see this." Thalek approached the isolated cell, his footsteps echoing ominously. As he drew closer, the figure within stepped into the light. It was Zarlik, the Vranthi leader, his ember-like eyes glowing fiercely despite the restraints that bound him. "About time," Zarlik said, his voice a guttural growl. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten the deal." Thalek's jaw tightened. "We're not here for pleasantries. Can you fight?" Zarlik smirked, the expression feral. "Unshackle me and I'll show you." On the Erebus, alarms blared as the holographic display lit up with red markers. "Commander, Imperial ships entering the system," Drelek reported, his voice taut with urgency. 3 cruisers and a destroyer. They're locking onto our position." Voss's jaw clenched. "Engage evasive maneuvers. Hold them off as long as you can." "And the infiltration team?" Karen asked, her tone sharp. "They'll have to move faster," Voss said, his voice like steel. Inside the prison, Thalek's team fought their way back toward the extraction point. Zarlek moved with lethal precision, his claws tearing through Imperial guards with terrifying efficiency. The prisoners followed, their movements slowed by exhaustion but fueled by newfound hope. Explosions rocked the complex as the Imperial reinforcements closed in. The storm outside raged fiercer than ever, its lightning strikes illuminating the chaos within. Thalek barked orders into his comms, his voice cutting through the din. "Aaron, cover the rear. Varys, get those prisoners on the shuttle." Zarlek paused briefly beside Thalek, his ember-like eyes meeting the sergeant's. "You fight well, human, but this is only the beginning. The Empire won't let this stand." Thalek snorted. "Good. Let them try." As the team reached the extraction point, the Erebus descended through the storm, its cloaking field shimmering as it unleashed a barrage of covering fire. The prisoners were loaded onto the shuttle, their faces a mixture of relief and disbelief. Thalek was the last to board, his armor streaked with ash and blood. As the shuttle lifted off, he cast one final glance at the burning prison below. On the Erebus, Voss watched the extraction unfold, his expression unreadable. The artifact pulsed faster now, its glyphs forming patterns that seemed almost frantic. "Commander," Karen said hesitantly, "the artifact, it's reacting to Zarlek." Voss's eyes narrowed. "Monitor it closely. Whatever it's doing, we need to understand why." As the shuttle docked and the prisoners were brought aboard, Voss stepped into the hangar. Zarlek met his gaze with a smirk, his ember-like eyes gleaming. "Impressive," Zarlek said. "You've proven your worth, Commander. The Vranthi will fight with you." Voss's reply was cold but decisive. "Then prepare your forces. This was a skirmish. The war is just beginning." The artifact pulsed one last time, its light casting long shadows across the hangar. Somewhere in the galaxy the Empire was stirring, and Voss knew the storm they had unleashed was far from over. The Erebus drifted silently through the void, cloaked in the reflective embrace of its advanced stealth systems. Veklar 9 was now a burning memory, the liberated prisoners on board whispering stories of defiance and survival. On the bridge, Commander Nathan Voss stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the artifact suspended in its containment chamber. Its glowing glyphs pulsed erratically, casting fractured light across the room. "We're entering the Corinth Rift," Lieutenant Karen reported, her voice subdued. "All systems stable, no sign of Imperial pursuit." "Good," Voss replied, though his tone lacked relief. The Corinth Rift was a labyrinth of gravitational anomalies and space-time fractures, a natural refuge for those desperate enough to risk its chaos. Yet the artifact's behavior unnerved him. Its glyphs no longer formed coherent patterns, but spiraled and twisted as if reacting to something unseen. "Dralek," Voss said, turning toward the communications officer. "Any signals in the region?" Dralek adjusted his headset, his sharp eyes scanning the console. "None, sir. It's a dead zone, perfect for hiding. Or ambushes." Voss's jaw tightened. The artifact had led them here, but its intentions were an enigma. "Keep scanning. If anything moves, I want to know before it knows us." In the war room, Zarlek stood beside Voss, his ember-like eyes studying the holographic display. The Vranthi leader carried himself with a predatory grace, his presence as sharp as a drawn blade. "You've been quiet since Veklar," Zarlek said, his voice a low rumble. "Regrets?" Voss glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "Regret has no place in war. Only results matter." "Spoken like someone who's lost too much to think otherwise," Zarlek remarked, his tone tinged with grim amusement. "But even predators need purpose. What drives you, Voss? Vengeance?" Voss's gaze returned to the display where the map of the rift shifted and churned with simulated turbulence. "Humanity doesn't have the luxury of vengeance. Survival drives us. Everything else is secondary." Zarlek tilted his head, studying the human commander with a mixture of curiosity and respect. "Then you'd better hope survival is enough. The Empire isn't just a machine, it's an infection. It doesn't stop until everything bends or breaks." In the lower decks, the liberated prisoners huddled in small groups, their faces marked by exhaustion and relief. Among them was Larek, a wiry Vranthi with a jagged scar tracing the side of his face. He sat apart from the others, his gaze distant as he traced the grooves of his restraining collar, which had been removed only hours earlier. "You seem restless," said Corporal Aaron, crouching nearby. His voice carried a careful blend of curiosity and caution. Larek glanced up, his ember-like eyes narrowing. "Restless is a kind word for someone who's spent years in a cell waiting to die." Aaron leaned against the wall, his expression softening. "You're free now. That has to count for something." Larek's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Freedom's a leash made of different chains. Don't think for a second that your commander doesn't see us as tools for his war." Aaron's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he stood and offered a small nod. "Maybe, but I've seen tools change the course of battles. Don't waste the chance you've been given." On the bridge, the tension thickened as the Erebus navigated deeper into the rift. The holographic display flickered as gravitational distortions interfered with the ship's sensors. "Something's ahead," Dralic said suddenly, his voice taut. "It's faint, but I'm picking up a mass reading, large and stationary. No energy signatures." Voss's gaze sharpened. "Visuals?" "Bringing it up now," Karen said, her hands gliding over the console. The display shifted to reveal a massive structure hidden within the swirling mists of the rift. It was ancient, its surface pockmarked and corroded, but its scale was staggering. Spires rose like jagged teeth, and faint glyphs similar to those on the artifact glowed intermittently across its surface. "The artifact led us here," Karen murmured, her voice tinged with awe. "And it's not a coincidence," Voss said, his tone colder than the void outside. "Prepare an away team. I want to know what's inside." The shuttle's descent into the structure's interior was slow and deliberate, its lights cutting through the eerie darkness. The air inside the structure was dense and heavy, carrying a faint metallic tang that clung to the back of the throat. Voss led the team, his every step measured as the artifact's pulsing light grew stronger. The chamber they entered was vast, its walls lined with intricate glyphs that seemed to shift under their gaze. The floor was smooth, reflective, and unnervingly pristine. At the center stood a pedestal, and upon it rested another artifact, larger than the one aboard the Erebus, its glyphs glowing with a menacing intensity. "What is this place?" Aaron whispered, his voice echoing faintly. "An archive," Zarlik said, his tone grave. "Or a tomb." Voss approached the pedestal, his hand hovering just above the artifact. Its glyphs reacted instantly, spiraling outward in a burst of light that filled the chamber. Images flickered before them, scenes of destruction, empires rising and falling in a dark, formless presence that seemed to devour entire systems. "Commander," Karen said, her voice trembling, This is a weapon." "No," Zarlik countered, his ember-like eyes narrowing. "It's a warning." Back on the Erebus, alarms blared as the artifact's light pulsed violently. The ship trembled, its systems straining under the sudden surge of energy. "Commander, we're picking up an Imperial fleet entering the rift," Dralic reported, his voice urgent. "They're coming straight for us." Voss's jaw tightened as he stepped back onto the bridge, his team following close behind. "How many?" "5 cruisers and a dreadnought," Dralic replied. "They've locked onto our position." Voss turned to Zarlik, his expression unreadable. "You said the Empire doesn't stop until everything bends or breaks. Let's see if they bend first." The Erebus engaged its cloaking systems as the Imperial fleet drew closer, the surrounding distortions masking their exact location. Voss's mind worked like a finely tuned machine, every possibility weighed and calculated. "Lieutenant Kaller," Voss ordered, his voice sharp, "prepare the fleet for a staggered ambush. Use the rift's gravity wells to isolate their ships. We take them out one by one." "Yes, Commander." As the Erebus maneuvered into position, the artifact aboard the ship pulsed again, its light casting fractured shadows across the bridge. Voss's gaze lingered on it, the weight of its guidance pressing against his every decision. "Commander," Karen said quietly, "are we walking into something we can't control?" Voss didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained locked on the display, where the first Imperial cruiser drifted into the ambush zone. "Control is an illusion, Lieutenant," he said finally, his voice colder than the void. "Victory is all that matters." The ambush began with brutal precision, humanity's fleet striking from the shadows with calculated ferocity. The Imperial ships reeled under the assault, their formations collapsing as the Erebus led the charge. Yet even as the battle raged, the artifact's pulsing light grew brighter, its glyphs shifting faster than ever. Deep within the rift, something stirred, something that watched and waited. And for the first time, Voss felt the weight of a power even he couldn't comprehend. The battle outside the Corinth Rift raged like a storm of fire and steel. Human ships danced between bursts of plasma, their cloaking fields shimmering as they struck with precision. The Erebus maneuvered gracefully through the chaos, its weapons silent as it coordinated the ambush. Yet, within its walls, an entirely different tension gripped the crew. Commander Nathan Voss stood at the center of the bridge, his silhouette outlined by the eerie glow of the artifact. The glyphs on its surface had grown frantic, shifting in ways that defied logic. It pulsed like a living thing, casting strange, distorted shadows across the room. "Status report," Voss ordered, his voice cutting through the hum of the ship's systems. Lieutenant Karen's fingers flew across her console. "2 enemy cruisers disabled, 1 critically damaged. The dreadnought is holding formation, using the rift's gravity wells to cover its approach." "Cowards," Zarlik growled from the corner of the room, his ember-like eyes glowing with feral intensity. "They're afraid to engage directly. They know they can't win." "Or they're buying time," Voss said, his tone colder than the void outside. "The Empire rarely acts without a plan." As if to punctuate his point, the ship shuddered violently. Alarms blared as the holographic display lit up with a cascade of red markers. "Massive energy spike detected," Ensign Dralick called out, his voice taut with urgency. "It's coming from the rift." All eyes turned to the artifact, its light now a blinding beacon that seemed to pierce the very fabric of reality. "Shut it down," Voss barked, his command slicing through the chaos. "I can't," Karen yelled, panic creeping into her voice. "It's overriding every system, like it's communicating." The ship groaned under the strain, its lights flickering as the artifact pulsed in time with the energy surging from the rift. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating through the walls and into the bones of everyone aboard. "What is it saying?" Zarlik asked, his voice low and edged with suspicion. Voss's gaze remained fixed on the artifact. "Not words. Intent outside, the battle reached a fever pitch. The Imperial dreadnought fired a concentrated barrage, its beams carving through the nebula like burning swords. A human frigate took a direct hit, its hull fracturing before it erupted into a brilliant explosion. "Commander, we're losing ships," Lieutenant Kalla reported from the tactical station. His voice was steady, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his concern. "If the artifact keeps disrupting our systems—" "It won't," Voss interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned to Karen. "Find a way to stabilize it now." "I'll try," Karen said, sweat glistening on her brow as she worked furiously at her console. The rift's energy grew more volatile, swirling like a cosmic whirlpool. Lightning arced through the void, illuminating a massive silhouette emerging from the depths. It was a structure. No, a ship. Its design was alien, ancient, its hull etched with glyphs identical to those on the artifact. "What in the stars is that?" Zarlik muttered, his usual bravado replaced by genuine awe. "A precursor vessel," Voss said, his voice almost a whisper. The artifact was calling it. The ship's bridge fell into a stunned silence as the precursor vessel fully emerged. It was colossal, dwarfing even the Imperial dreadnought. Its surface seemed to ripple with energy, its glyphs glowing like embers in the darkness. "This changes everything," Zarlik said, his ember-like eyes narrowing. "Or ends everything," Voss replied grimly. The precursor vessel began to move, its sheer presence warping the space around it. The Imperial fleet shifted its focus, firing on the ancient behemoth with everything they had. Beams of plasma and missiles slammed into its hull, but the attacks dissipated harmlessly like waves crashing against a mountain. "It's absorbing the energy," Karen said, her voice trembling. "Commander, if that thing decides we're a threat, then we'll die like everything else in its path," Voss finished, his tone resolute. "But we won't give it the chance. Open a channel to the Imperial fleet." Dralic hesitated. "Sir?" "Do it!" Voss snapped. The holographic display shifted to show the Imperial dreadnought's bridge. Its captain, a stern-faced Valtherian with pale silver skin and piercing blue eyes, glared back at Voss. "You!" the captain spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "The human scourge! You think this abomination will spare you?" "No," Voss said evenly. "But it might destroy you first. We both know the Empire won't survive losing this fleet. If we work together—" "Together?" the captain sneered. "You dare suggest—" "Shut up and listen!" Voss barked, his voice thunderous. "You can hate us later. Right now, that thing is waking up, and it doesn't care who's right or wrong. Fight us, and we all die. Help us, and we might just survive." The captain's eyes narrowed, the tension crackling like static between them. Finally, he gave a reluctant nod. "We will hold fire. For now." With an uneasy truce established, the combined fleets turned their attention to the precursor vessel. Voss worked tirelessly, coordinating attacks to keep the ancient ship contained while searching for a way to communicate or disable it. Inside the Erebus, the artifact's light dimmed slightly, its glyphs slowing as if calming in the presence of its counterpart. "Commander," Karen said cautiously, "I think the artifact is stabilizing. It's still linked to the precursor vessel, but it's no longer overwhelming our systems." "Good," Voss said. "We need answers. Keep monitoring it." Zarlik stepped closer to the display, his ember-like eyes fixed on the massive ship. "Do you think it's alive?" "I think it's waiting," Voss replied. "For what? I don't know." Outside, the combined fleets launched synchronized attacks, targeting weak points identified by the artifact's glyphs. The precursor vessel retaliated, its energy beams slicing through the void with terrifying precision. Ships exploded in bursts of light, their debris joining the growing graveyard of metal and fire. On board the Erebus, Voss watched as the battle unfolded, his mind racing. Every decision carried the weight of countless lives, but the mystery of the precursor vessel gnawed at him. "Commander," Karen said suddenly, her voice sharp, "the artifact, it's projecting something." The holographic display shifted, revealing a sequence of symbols that resolved into a simple, chilling message. "You are not ready." Voss stared at the words, his chest tightening. Not ready for what? Before anyone could answer, the precursor vessel emitted a low, resonant hum that reverberated through the rift. The energy surrounding it began to coalesce, forming a massive, glowing sphere at its center. "It's charging something," Dralic said, his voice edged with panic. "Focus all fire on that sphere," Voss commanded, his voice a whip cracking through the tension. The combined fleets unleashed everything they had, their weapons slamming into the precursor vessel in a desperate attempt to disrupt its energy buildup. The artifact aboard the Erebus pulsed wildly, its glyphs shifting faster than ever. As the sphere grew brighter, Voss felt a cold certainty settle over him. This was no ordinary weapon. It was a message, a declaration. And humanity was at the center of it. The bridge of the Erebus was a storm of activity, the tension in the air almost palpable. Every screen was alight with cascading data as the combined fleets threw everything they had against the precursor vessel. The energy sphere at the ship's core pulsed like a heartbeat, its light intensifying with each passing second. Commander Nathan Voss stood at the center of it all, his gaze unwavering as he processed the chaos around him. The glyphs on the artifact reflected off his face, casting an eerie glow that mirrored the storm within his mind. "Status!" Voss barked, his voice sharp and commanding. "Fleet losses are mounting," Lieutenant Kaller reported, his hands flying over the tactical console. "The precursor vessel is absorbing most of the energy we throw at it, and that sphere is still charging." Voss turned to Zarlik, the Vranthi leader, who stood at the edge of the room with his arms crossed. his ember-like eyes fixed on the display. "What do you see?" "A predator waiting for the kill," Zarlek growled. "Whatever it's doing, it's not meant to scare us. It's meant to end us." Voss took a deep breath, forcing himself to think clearly. Panic wouldn't save them. Only strategy would. He turned to his officers, his voice steady despite the storm raging outside. "We need to divide its attention," Voss said. "It's focusing on the combined fleet because we're concentrated in one formation. If we split into smaller strike teams and attack from multiple angles, it might force it to redirect its energy." "That's a risk," Karen said, her tone cautious. "If we spread too thin, we won't have enough firepower to disable its systems." "That's why we don't rely on firepower alone," Voss replied, his mind racing. "Dralek, are there any gravitational anomalies in the rift near its position?" Dralek scanned his console, his eyes narrowing. "Yes, sir. A cluster of anomalies about 12 clicks from the vessel, strong enough to disrupt its energy field, but only if we lure it close." Voss nodded, the beginnings of a plan taking shape. "Here's what we do. The main fleet will stage a feigned retreat, drawing the precursor vessel toward the anomalies. Meanwhile, we send cloaked strike teams to disable its propulsion systems and weaken its defenses. If we time it right, the gravitational disruptions will destabilize the energy sphere and give us a chance to destroy it." The plan required precision, coordination, and absolute trust. Voss's voice cut through the hum of the bridge as he issued his orders. "Lieutenant Kaller, take command of the main fleet and begin the retreat. Make it look convincing. Scatter the ships, leave gaps in the formation, but keep them within striking distance of the anomalies." "Yes, Commander," Kaller replied, his voice resolute. "Karen, you're with me. We'll lead the strike teams. Zarlek, I want your Vranthi fighters to spearhead the attack. Their agility will be key to dodging the vessel's countermeasures." Zarlek grinned, his sharp teeth glinting. "Finally, a proper hunt." Voss turned to the artifact, its glyphs now spinning in chaotic patterns. He placed a hand on the console beside it, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "And you, whatever you are, guide us now, or we all die." The combined fleet began its retreat, the ships peeling away from the precursor vessel in a calculated display of disarray. The Imperial dreadnought took the lead, its massive form acting as a decoy to draw the enemy's focus. On board the Erebus, Voss and his team prepared for their mission. The shuttle bay buzzed with activity as strike teams armed themselves with EMP charges and plasma cutters. The air was thick with tension, the weight of the mission pressing down on every soldier. "Commander," Karen said as they boarded the lead shuttle, "you're placing a lot of faith in that artifact. What if it's leading us into a trap?" Voss glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Faith has nothing to do with it. This is about survival. If the artifact wants us to succeed, then we use it. If not, we adapt." The shuttle launched, its cloaking field engaging as it weaved through the battlefield. The precursor vessel loomed ahead, its sheer size dwarfing everything around it. The energy sphere at its core pulsed brighter, its glow casting long shadows across the debris-strewn void. As the shuttle neared the vessel, Zarlek's voice crackled over the comms. "Vranthi fighters in position. We'll hit the propulsion systems first, draw their fire." "Understood," Voss replied. "Stay sharp." The strike teams deployed in synchronized precision, their cloaked ships darting toward the precursor vessel like shadows in the dark. The EMP charges detonated against its propulsion arrays, sending ripples of energy across its surface. For a moment, the vessel seemed to falter, its movements slowing. "Direct hit," Karen reported, her voice taut with excitement. But the victory was short-lived. The vessel responded with a burst of energy, its countermeasures activating in a blinding display of light and force. Cloaked ships were thrown off course, their systems overloaded by the sudden surge. "Hold formation," Voss commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We've come too far to fall apart now." Inside the vessel, Voss and his team moved with surgical precision. The air was cold and metallic, the walls lined with glyphs that pulsed faintly in time with the artifact. Every step echoed ominously, the silence broken only by the hum of distant machinery. The objective was clear: disable the energy core. The artifact's glyphs seemed to guide them, shifting and glowing as they approached the central chamber. As they entered, the energy sphere dominated the room, its light blinding and its heat palpable. The glyphs on its surface twisted and writhed, their patterns maddeningly complex. "Karen, set the charges," Voss ordered, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. As Karen worked, Zarlik moved to Voss's side, his ember-like eyes fixed on the sphere. "This isn't just a weapon," he said, his voice low. "It's alive. It knows we're here." "I don't care what it knows," Voss replied coldly. "We end it here, or it ends us." The charges were set, their timers counting down as the team prepared to evacuate. But the sphere began to pulse faster, its light intensifying to a blinding crescendo. The glyphs on the artifact mirrored its movements, their chaotic patterns forming a single, chilling message. "You are not enough." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, their weight pressing down on Voss and his team. "What does it mean?" Karen whispered, her voice trembling. Voss's jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter. Get to the shuttle. Now." As the team retreated, the charges detonated, sending shockwaves through the vessel. The energy sphere cracked, its light flickering as it began to collapse. The precursor vessel shuddered, its glyphs dimming as the strike teams escaped into the void. Back on the Erebus, the bridge erupted in cheers as the precursor vessel began to disintegrate. But Voss remained silent, his gaze fixed on the artifact. Its light had dimmed, but its glyphs continued to shift, forming patterns that spoke of something far greater than the battle they had just won. "This isn't over," Voss said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of the galaxy. This was just the beginning. The Erebus drifted in silence, the void surrounding it littered with the remnants of battle. The precursor vessel's collapse had created a graveyard of warped metal and shattered ships. Yet, despite the victory, the atmosphere aboard the bridge was heavy. The artifact sat dormant, its once vibrant glyphs now dim and inscrutable, as if waiting for humanity's next move. Commander Nathan Voss stood at the command console, his face a mask of quiet determination. His hands rested firmly on the edge of the console, knuckles white against the dim glow of holographic displays. The message from the artifact, "You are not enough," echoed in his mind, refusing to be silenced. "Report," Voss said, his voice low but unwavering. "Imperial forces are retreating," Lieutenant Karen responded, her tone cautious. "Their dreadnought is still operational, but moving out of the rift at full speed. They've left their damaged cruisers behind." Voss's lips tightened. "Not a retreat, a regroup." Zarlik, leaning against a bulkhead with his arms crossed, snorted. "Let them regroup. They've seen what we're capable of. They'll think twice before trying that again." Voss turned to Zarlik, his expression sharp. "This wasn't just a battle. It was a warning, one we barely survived. The Empire won't wait for us to catch our breath. They'll come back harder, stronger. If we don't end this now, we may not get another chance." Zarlik straightened, his ember-like eyes narrowing. "So what's the plan, Voss?" "You don't strike me as the type to let fear dictate your choices." "It's not fear," Voss replied, his voice edged with steel. "It's reality." The War Council convened in the Erebus's strategy room, the air thick with the weight of impending decisions. Holographic projections of the galaxy hovered above the table, marking Imperial strongholds, supply lines, and potential weak points. Voss addressed the gathered leaders, his tone calm yet firm. "We have one chance to force the Empire into submission. Their fleets are scattered, their supply lines strained. If we strike at their heart, the Imperial capital, we can dismantle their command structure and end this war." "That's suicide," one of the human captains said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "The capital is the most heavily fortified system in the galaxy. Even with their forces weakened, they'll have enough firepower to annihilate us before we get within striking distance." "Not if we force them to divide their attention," Voss countered. He gestured to the map, highlighting key systems surrounding the capital. "We launch simultaneous assaults on their outlying strongholds, creating the illusion of a multi-front invasion. When their fleets move to respond, we strike the capital with everything we've got." "And if the illusion fails?" Zarlik asked, his tone skeptical. Voss met Zarlik's gaze, unflinching. "It won't." The fleet's preparation was a symphony of controlled chaos. Cloaked ships departed for their diversionary missions, their captains entrusted with the responsibility of drawing the Empire's gaze away from the true target. On board the Erebus, strike teams armed themselves for what they knew could be their final mission. The tension was palpable, every movement purposeful, every word spoken in hushed tones. In the armory, Corporal Aaron secured his equipment with methodical precision. Larek, the scarred Vranthi prisoner turned ally, watched from a nearby bench. "You don't seem afraid," Larek said, his voice carrying a note of curiosity. Aaron glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Fear's always there. The trick is not letting it decide for you." Larek tilted his head, his ember-like eyes narrowing. "And what decides for you?" Aaron's smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet determination. "The people we lost, the ones we're fighting for. That's enough." The Imperial capital loomed ahead, its twin suns casting an ethereal glow over a sprawling network of orbital defenses and planet-bound fortresses. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, the Erebus at its center. The Empire's defenses reacted instantly, hundreds of ships mobilizing to intercept the unexpected assault. "All ships, hold formation," Voss commanded, his voice steady despite the odds. "We take this system, or we die trying." The battle began with a deafening fury. Human ships wove through enemy formations, their cloaked fighters striking with surgical precision. The Empire's larger vessels retaliated with overwhelming firepower, their beams carving through the void with deadly intent. Explosions lit up the darkness, each one a stark reminder of the stakes. "Commander, we've breached the outer defenses," Karen reported, her voice strained. "But they're throwing everything they have at us." "Good," Voss replied, his gaze fixed on the central fortress visible on the main display. "Let them. It means they're desperate." The Erebus led the charge toward the central fortress, its weapons blazing as it carved a path through the chaos. On board, Voss coordinated the assault with a precision born of necessity. Every decision was calculated, every command deliberate. "Karen, focus fire on their shield generators. Drelek, keep our flanks covered. Zarlik, take your fighters and target their weapon systems. I want that fortress blind and vulnerable." The bridge erupted into a flurry of activity as the crew executed Voss's orders. The Erebus shuddered under enemy fire, but it pressed on, undeterred. As the central fortress's shields began to falter, the artifact on the bridge pulsed faintly, its glyphs flickering to life. Voss felt a chill run down his spine as he approached it, the weight of its message hanging heavily in the air. "What now?" Zarlik asked, his voice wary. Voss's jaw tightened. "Now, we finish this." The final push toward the fortress was a brutal gauntlet. Human ships fell in flames, their sacrifices paving the way for the Erebus to breach the enemy's defenses. Inside the fortress, Voss led the ground assault, his strike team moving with relentless precision. The corridors were a maze of fire and blood, the air thick with the acrid stench of burning metal and flesh. Every step forward was met with resistance, every victory hard-earned. Yet Voss pressed on, his focus unshakable. In the command center, the Imperial governor stood defiant, his face twisted with fury. "You think you've won?" he spat. "This fortress is only one piece of the Empire's might. You cannot destroy what we've built." Voss leveled his weapon at the governor, his voice cold and unyielding. "We don't need to destroy it. We just need to show the galaxy that it can be done." As the fortress fell, the Empire's remaining forces began to retreat. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the once unstoppable Empire crumbled under humanity's defiance. On the bridge of the Erebus, Voss addressed the galaxy in a final broadcast, his words carrying the weight of a species reborn. "To the Empire," Voss said, his voice steady and resolute. "You shattered our world and enslaved our people. You believed us broken. You were wrong. Humanity does not forgive, and we do not forget. Your time is over. Surrender or face the consequences." He paused, his gaze piercing through the screen as if addressing each viewer directly. "To the oppressed, we offer hope. To the tyrants, we offer justice. And to the galaxy, We offer this truth. Humanity endures. The artifact pulsed one final time, its glyphs fading into darkness as if acknowledging the end of its purpose. The bridge fell silent, the weight of the moment settling over the crew. Humanity had risen from the ashes, not as conquerors, but as liberators. The galaxy would never be the same.